money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. All the power is on today, so we're not having the technical problems we had yesterday. But, hey, we still managed to have a full 2-hour show. We just had to do it at a different time slot to take care of those problems. But anyway, we are taking your calls live for the next 2 hours. 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF is the number to call. Hey, we got a great guest coming up at the top of the next hour, the second hour. Republican presidential candidate Gary Johnson joins the show. And Gary got some great news. I think it was maybe just as early as yesterday, because that's when I read about it, that he is now going to be included in tomorrow night's, I think it's tomorrow night, Fox Republican presidential debate. This is the first time Gary Johnson has been in a debate since the very first debate that they had, also on Fox, down in, was it South Carolina? I think I went down there for that debate, actually. And ever since then, he has been excluded, even though, you know, in the polls, I mean, yeah, he's polling low, 1 or 2% or so, but, I mean, that's the same as Huntsman, yet he's in all the debates. So we're going to talk to Gary. I don't know what he finally did to get Fox to include him. Hopefully this means that he will be part of the debates going forward, because I think he's an important voice to be heard and should be heard. So he's going to have a good story to tell. So he's coming up at the top of the next hour, so make sure and stick around for that. Meantime, the markets are off to a pretty quiet start today. I mean, hey, the Dow isn't even up or down 100 points. It's only about 20 points. So it's pretty quiet. The dollar index is up a bit. I mean, the biggest movers seem to be some of the commodity currencies. The Canadian dollar is down. In fact, the Canadian dollar is now trading below a U.S. dollar in the spot market. This is the first time I've seen that in a while, so I'm not exactly sure why the Canadian dollar has been as weak as it is. Right now it's about 99.5 versus the U.S. dollar. But the dollar is pretty much up against all the currencies, with maybe the exception of the euro. The euro is pretty, basically flat today, slightly positive. Now, Ben Bernanke is finishing up a 2-day Fed meeting today, and so potentially we could get some news out of the Fed that could have a very substantial impact on the foreign exchange markets, on the precious metals markets. Right now, gold is off about $10 on the ETF. Silver, on the other hand, is going the other way, up about the equivalent of 20 cents. And gold stocks continue to rise, not up dramatically, but we're up about 1/3% in the Huey index, despite the fact that gold itself is down about 0.7%. Anyway, what I wanted to talk a little bit about before I take the calls, there's quite a few people already in the queue. I just, a lot of people always want to try to knock me off my pedestal. Hey, here's this guy, Peter Schiff, claiming he was right, especially, other money managers. Sometimes they try to attract business by trying to attack me and trying to demean my credibility. And one guy was out there, and he put a whole bunch of videos. I mentioned it the other day. And I just noticed he did another one where he dug up an interview that I did back in 2002 on May 9th in a small TV show called Southland Today. I think it's the first time I was ever on television. It was a local show. And, it was a long gap. I mean, I wasn't on again until like 2005. So there's not a lot of video of what I was saying between those two dates. But in any event, I have that video up on my website. If you want to watch it, just go to the Video Archives Media. Go to 2005 for the year, because we don't have a year for 2002. And then you'll see at the bottom there's this 2002 interview from Southland Today. You can also YouTube it, Peter Schiff, Southland Today. A couple of people have put it up there and broken it into 2 parts, so you can watch the whole interview. And one of the forecasts I made in that interview, I said the Dow would go down to 4,000 or maybe as low as 2,000. At the time, it was at 10,000. And I said the NASDAQ was going to go to 500. At the time, it was 1,700. Now, they're using this. He uses this forecast to try to say, oh, look, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's completely wrong. Look at all the gains that the Dow has had since May 9th, 2002. He's got an F on his report card. He's got lousy investment advice. People who followed his advice, look, obviously they lost a lot of money. They missed out on this huge rally and all that. Well, if you actually watch the entire video, it paints a very different picture. And, of course, my NASDAQ 500 prediction, I didn't start making that in May of 2002. I started making that prediction when the Dow first hit 5,000. I was like, this is it. This is a huge bubble. It's going to burst. I think it's going to fall 90%. And I was saying the NASDAQ's going to 500. Of course, most of the brokers at that time were predicting NASDAQ 10,000, But in any event, it didn't go all the way down to 500. It went to around 1,100. So it got pretty close, right? But it didn't get all the way there. But when I did this interview, the NASDAQ was at 1,700, and it did drop by about 30% in the next few months. The Dow dropped about 25% during the same period of time, and it took about a year and a half before the Dow and the NASDAQ got back to the levels that they were at when I recorded this interview. But something happened between May 9, 2002, and that point. I changed my mind. I became bullish on U.S. stocks and the Dow and the NASDAQ, not because I thought the fundamentals have changed, but because I saw how reckless Alan Greenspan was. My prediction of a bigger drop in the Dow and NASDAQ was also predicated on my belief that the recession would be more severe than it was and that interest rates would rise. That didn't happen. But I shortly after that interview, within a year of that interview, I figured out that that wasn't going to happen, that the Fed was going to be successful in postponing the pain. And so I changed my forecast and then said the markets are going to go up. It doesn't, obviously give me any credit for that. But the interesting thing is if you watch that whole interview, what did I say? What are the things I actually said? Well, I said that oil prices, energy prices would keep rising. Well, at the time, oil was $25 a barrel. It's now 260% higher at almost $90 a barrel. Of course, it did get as high as 140, but based on where it is right now, it's about 260% higher. Also, I said gold would keep going up. Gold was about $300 an ounce at the time I did that interview. It's now 5 times higher. Gold's at $1,800 an ounce. So obviously, that was an accurate prediction. I also said that the dollar index looked like it was about to collapse, and I said people should sell the dollar. At the time, the dollar index was at 115. It dropped as low as about 71. Right now, it's about 77, which is better than 30% below where it was when I did that interview. Also, I did make recommendations about stock markets. I wasn't bearish. See, his implication is I left all this on the table because I told my clients or I told people to sell their stocks and put their money in cash. I didn't do that at all. So when we come back, I'm going to go over exactly what I advised in that interview, and we can see what's happened. And then I'll be taking your calls here at the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. So stick around.
The Peter Schiff Show.
It's clear to just about everybody that the global economic sands are shifting. Have you positioned your investment?
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry.
We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com, and before the commercial, we were talking about my television appearance on Southland Today, which was a small TV show back in Orange County where I was working in 2009. I gave the interview on May 9, 2009. Since that date to today, the Dow Jones is up about 14% in the last 9 years, and the NASDAQ is up 50%. And the impression that this money manager was trying to make was that my clients had missed out on all these gains because I was so bearish on the U.S. stock market at that point, and I had gotten it completely wrong. Of course, a 14% gain in the Dow over 9 years is really, is really nothing to be bragging about. Of course, yes, there's some dividend yield there, but not much. The NASDAQ, of course, did a little better at 50% gain. But remember, that's 9 years. Of course, that doesn't adjust for inflation. Right? If you adjust for inflation, it's a whole different picture. Certainly if you price the Dow or the NASDAQ in terms of gold, in fact, the Dow actually declined by more than I forecast if you want to price it in gold. which is, a better way to look at it given all the inflation that the Fed created. But I specifically I talked about what I was suggesting that people do, and one thing I said is that they get out of the dollar and buy foreign currencies and foreign government bonds. And I mentioned three currencies, and only three in particular, as examples of currencies that I was recommending. One was the euro, another was the Swiss franc, and another was the Australian dollar. So what's happened to those three currencies since May 9th, 2002? The euro is up 50%. The Swiss franc is up 90%. Of course, it would have been up a lot more had the Swiss government not clobbered it recently. And the Australian dollar is up 100%. So in other words, if somebody followed my advice back on May 9th and sold their stocks and bought CDs or government bonds in any of those currencies, they did substantially better than the Dow, and they even did better than the NASDAQ. In fact, they did a lot better than the NASDAQ. So how would somebody look at that advice and say it was completely wrong, it was bad advice, and I should get an F on my report card? But now let's look at the stock markets. I didn't just say that people should avoid the stock market. I said that that people should buy stocks. And I gave 4 countries as examples of where we were buying stocks and where I thought it made sense to buy stocks. The countries I specifically mentioned in that video were Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand. So what have those stock markets done in the 9 years since that video was recorded? Well, the Hang Seng is up about, this is approximately, not exact, Hang Seng is up 70%. Singapore, and I put this in U.S. dollars. Now, the Hong Kong market, Hong Kong dollar is pegged, so there were no currency gains in that market. But the other currencies, other markets have free-floating currency. So let's see how they did. The Singapore Straight Times Index, Singapore Index, that was up 130% since May 9th, 2002. The Australian stock market during the same 9-year period, up 150% in dollar terms. The New Zealand stock market up 190% since that interview. So in other words, the Australian stock market outperformed the Dow Jones by tenfold. The New Zealand market did it by more than tenfold. So the returns in the markets that I was talking about were actually spectacular. Now, again, I'm not trying to talk about my track record here because I can't do that. I'm not talking about my past performance. The regulators won't let me talk about that. I'm just mentioning what happened in these stock markets where I was saying that people should be investing as opposed to the U.S. market. I'm not saying that any of my clients had these returns, any of my clients did this. I'm just looking at the video that this particular money manager is using to discredit me by saying, gee, look how bad his investment advice is. He told people not to buy U.S. stocks, and look how much they went up. Well, they barely went up, but meanwhile, look at the markets where I told people to invest. Look at how much they actually went up. So instead of, discrediting me, the video that he's using actually proves that my forecasts were very prescient. And I actually spoke about some of the problems that we're having today in the real estate market way ahead of time. But anybody can take something out of context to try to put any kind of spin that they want on it and to create the false impression that what I was saying turned out to be false, when obviously, in hindsight, you do have now 9 years of information that what I was saying turned out to be very accurate. Now, I talked to this particular money manager, again, registering my complaints. He seemed rather gracious, and so we'll see what he's going to do. He said maybe he'll have me on his show. He has his own kind of show on his website. Not really sure how many people watch it, but, I do get offended when this kind of stuff happens. I think that I did get a lot of stuff right. I don't like when people try to imply otherwise by distorting the facts, particularly when they have an ulterior motive, such as a competitor in the investment industry trying to unfairly attack my track record or the success that I've had in order to encourage people to use his service rather than mine. Hey, anyway, before I grab the phones, I just wanted to mention, I got an email based on the show I did, I guess is probably on Fox, either last, I think it was last night or this morning. I did Greta Van Susteren last night, and I did Fox and Friends this morning. But I talked about the problems with government regulations, and I mentioned about the Americans with Disability Act, and I said, hey, this act has done a lot of harm because a lot of businesses are reluctant to hire people in wheelchairs now because they're afraid of getting sued, whereas before the Americans with Disability Act, they would have no problem. And so this guy writes me an email, and he's saying, your CEO went on national TV saying that he would not hire a disabled person because it was too risky. Now, I didn't say I wouldn't. I said that there are people who won't. He says, do you even know the law about doing that? I will be filing a complaint with the federal government as I am disabled, and I would suggest someone make him listen to what he said. It was disgusting. Yeah, of course I know there's a law against discriminating. That's my point. Because there is a law against it, and because people like this individual can file lawsuits against employers who they feel are not abiding by the law, that's the reason that employers want to stay as far away as they can from anybody who can sue them. Now, the employer is not going to come out and admit, yes, I'm not going to hire somebody in a wheelchair, because then he can get sued. But what he does privately, if there's a small employer and he's got 3 or 4 people and none of them are in wheelchairs, you can't just make a conclusion that he's discriminating. As a matter of fact, nobody that works for me is in a wheelchair, but I don't think anybody in a wheelchair has ever even interviewed for a job with it. I can't even remember somebody wheeling into a job interview on a wheelchair. So it's not like there's not that many people in wheelchairs in the workforce. I mean, sure there are, but I've never even encountered one. Yet this guy thinks he can sue me simply because I mentioned that small businesses who are trying to minimize their legal costs now try to avoid hiring this disabled, whereas prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, they had no problem hiring disabled. And the facts bear me out. All you have to do is look at the statistics. Look at the unemployment rate among the disabled now and compare it to before the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's gone straight up. Anyway, let me go to the phones. First on hold is Alex calling from Fort Lee, New Jersey. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hi. I have 2 questions about the Federal Reserve. They're kind of related. The first one is, am I understanding this right, that every dollar that the Federal Reserve prints is then a dollar owed by the U.S. the Treasury to the Federal Reserve? So how can they ever pay the debt?
No. I mean, basically what happens is the technical characterization of Federal Reserve notes, and they call them notes because they're liabilities. So the Federal Reserve note is a liability of the Federal Reserve, okay? Now, what are they obligated to pay you? Well, basically nothing, right? But it's a liability, but it used to represent a liability to pay gold. The Federal Reserve note, the Federal Reserve would have to give you gold. Initially, if you had 35 Federal Reserve notes, they'd have to give you an ounce of gold. But it's still on the books as a Federal Reserve liability, even though they don't have to pay you anything. The assets that the Federal Reserve holds, in large part, are U.S. Treasuries. So Treasuries represents assets to the Fed, and the money they print represents their liabilities. But I think that's where a lot of this comes. We're running out of time. If you want to hold on, I can continue to explain this, because I think it's the source of a lot of this conspiracy stuff when people misunderstand the Fed balance sheet. Anyway, stick around. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show.
Stars light up my life.
The Peter Schiff Show.
The stars light up my life.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SHIFT.
That's 855-472-4433.
Real Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
And this is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com, and I am talking with Alex from Fort Lee, New Jersey, about the Federal Reserve. And Alex, so was I able to explain the situation to you, or do you have any additional questions?
I'm still a little confused. Is the $14 trillion that's our national debt, is part of that owed to the Federal Reserve?
Yes. I mean, the Federal Reserve holds U.S. Treasuries, right, which it purchases by creating money out of thin air. So, and the Federal Reserve is actually now the largest holder of U.S. government bonds. It holds more than China. It holds more than, than Japan. So, yes, the government owes money to the Federal Reserve. But, for all practical purposes, even though the Federal Reserve is not part of the government, it is a separate private entity. From all practically speaking, it doesn't function that way. The Federal Reserve actually functions like an arm of the government. That's part of the problem. So it's kind of like, the treasury, the bonds that the Federal Reserve owns, it's kind of like the bonds that the Social Security Trust Fund owes. You know, the Social Security so-called trust fund also has government bonds in it, and so the Treasury owes money to the Social Security Trust Fund. But you really can't owe money to yourself. I mean, you can't write a check to yourself, and it's not really a liability. It's not really an asset. So I don't think that the bonds that the Federal Reserve owns really represent a liability. The problem is what they represent is how much money the Federal Reserve printed. And so you know how big the balance sheet is, how much inflation has been created, and how much value the Federal Reserve has destroyed of our money.
Okay, that actually leads right into my other question, which was, if the Treasury defaults only on the bonds that it owes to the Federal Reserve, what would be the effect of that?
Well, I mean, pretty much nothing, because it doesn't actually have to pay the Federal Reserve. I mean, yes, it technically pays the Federal Reserve interest, but I mean, it doesn't matter because the Fed just creates the money. I mean, it's just like if the federal government basically said we're not going to pay Social Security. The debt that's really important is the debt that's held by the public. Now, for practical purposes, yes, people on Social Security are expecting to get paid, right? But the fact that there are bonds in that Social Security Trust Fund means nothing. The government is going to have to pay Social Security benefits out of taxation. But as far as the real obligations that have to be paid by the Treasury, those are the debts that are held outside the government or outside the Federal Reserve. That would be the debts held by individuals or by foreign institutions like foreign central banks. Those are the ones that have to be paid. Now, theoretically, they could default. But defaulting on the money it owes itself, I mean, what would be the impact if you wrote yourself a check for $1 million and then you tore up the check? I mean, would there be any impact? No.
I see. Okay. And do you think that fractional reserve banking should be legal, allowed?
Yeah, I do, but I think under a gold standard. See, there is going to be some fractional reserve banking under a gold standard, but if you don't have deposit insurance, which I don't want to have either, then banks are under competitive pressures to keep a lot of reserves because they don't want to run. If people know that there's no guarantee to their bank account, they want to put their money in banks that have adequate reserves that aren't too levered up. And so that's what you'd have. You'd have competition in the market, and banks would try to optimize their profits but also minimize the potential for a run, because the last thing the bank wants is to people to doubt its credibility or its solvency. People think that they can't get their money. You know, remember that scene in Mary Poppins where this kid wants his money back, and then the bank won't give. He wants to deposit it, and the bank won't give him his pence back or whatever it was. And then somebody hears that the bank won't give somebody their money, and then all of a sudden there's a huge run. So the bankers have to protect themselves. Of course, now they don't have to. Nobody worries about banks because the government guarantees the accounts.
I see. Okay. And do you think insider trading should be legal?
Well, I think fraud should be illegal. And so I don't like a lot of these special laws that apply just to the investment industry. I mean, I think there are basic things that are wrong that can be illegal based on existing laws. The insider trading laws I think, are overly broad in punishing conduct. And in fact, in many cases, people who think they're acting on inside information are wrong. My guess is that more people lose money based on insider information than make money. Because but you can't. It's only when the tip turns out to be real and you actually make money does the government come after you. But the question is, you think, well, who is the injured party in the insider trade? Now, you might say, well, because this person sold and so somebody else bought and they overpaid. It's often hard to show, like in the case with what's her name, Martha Stewart. I mean, that was a ridiculous case against Martha Stewart for the way she thought that was insider trading. I mean, I don't think, based on my knowledge of what insider trading is, there's anything wrong with what Martha Stewart did, yet she ended up in jail. But apparently she ended up in jail not for the insider trading, but for trying to cover up what she thought might have been insider trading, but wasn't. So now, do I think there could be some civil liability? And do I think it is wrong if somebody in a company that works for a company has certain knowledge and then uses that knowledge for his, to advance his own. Yes, I think it's wrong, and I think it could be punished. But should it be criminal or should it be civil? I think it's more of a civil violation where the remedies would be through civil lawsuits and through money damages through the injured parties or from the corporation. But I don't think it's something that it does. I don't think it's criminal, and they have people in jail for a long time on pretty flimsy insider trading charges.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that up. I actually read that if you act on information that the government does, like let's say I have a friend who works for the Fed and he tells me they're going to print money today, that's not insider trading. Do you know if that's true or not?
Well, I mean, if you know specifically that the Fed is about to make an announcement, but here's the problem. Let's assume that you know somebody that works for the Federal Reserve and you get advanced knowledge of what the Fed's going to do. Like the Fed's going to come out and they're going to hike rates by a quarter point. And let's say you now know it, but no one else knows for sure, but you know for sure. What are you going to do? You're going to buy stocks? You're going to sell stocks? How do you know what's going to happen? I mean, the Fed could raise interest rates and the market could go up or the market could go down. You don't really know. I mean, that information doesn't really help you because you don't really know how the market's going to react to it. Now, the thing is, what if you get the insider information and then you place a bet maybe on the treasuries and you think they're going to go up based on your inside information? And what if they go down? Well, now you lost. No one's going to investigate you. But if you make the investment and you win, most of the time the insider information doesn't really help. Now, obviously, if you have real inside information, you know the company's about to be bought out. And you know the deal's been signed, and you know the price, and the stock's at 30, and you know for sure the stock's about to be bought for 50, and then you go and buy it, obviously you're going to make money. Do I think people that are in possession of that information should be allowed to act on it? No. They're not. They shouldn't be allowed to act on it. But again, what is the best remedy? I mean, should they go to jail for 20 or 30 years? I don't think so. But I think there should be civil remedies against it. It doesn't mean it has to be done through the SEC. It can be done through, state courts. It could be done. Most, corporations could go after their executives for acting against their shareholders. So, I mean, I think there are better remedies than having this gigantic government regulatory body called the SEC, which I think does far more harm than good to the securities industry. And I think the same thing about all the regulations. I think the market would be better. It would be safer for investors. Investors would have more choice. They'd have more services. Those services would be offered at lower prices if we can get rid of all these rules and regulations. Anyway, hey, thanks for the call. Next up is Tom calling from Laughlin, Nevada. Tom, you're on.
Yeah, good morning. Are you ready for a challenge today?
All right. What's up?
Okay. Before I make the challenge, I'll make a short comment. A true strong economy is like a too beautiful woman. They both don't exist.
All right. I'd agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now the challenge. You say that they can't print gold.
Correct.
I say they can print gold just like they print paper.
How?
By putting a value on it. The old Liberty.
Well, no. Who's they? Who's they?
The government. We're talking about the government. A government.
But the government. But the government doesn't put a value on gold. They put a value on their money in terms of gold. But they can't determine what the value of gold is.
Now, what about the old $20 gold piece? The old Liberty $20 gold piece. That's fiat money.
No, it's not. It's gold. It's not fiat. See, fiat money means money that has no intrinsic value, that's backed by nothing.
No.
Gold is money by itself because it's valued for its own properties. Gold is an asset. It's a mineral that has rare properties that have value. And that's what it's wanted for. It's wanted for all the work. If you want to get an ounce of gold, how do you get it? You got to mine it. You got to find it. You got to get it out of the ground. And then if you want to put it in a coin, you got to fabricate it. The government can print $1 million as easily as it can print $1. It can print $1 billion. It can put as many zeros as it wants on a dollar bill. That's what fiat is. But if the government wants a billion gold coins, it just can't produce them. It's got to find. I mean, it takes a lot of effort. You got to find those things.
It doesn't have to print a billion coins, Peter. All it has to do is fiat doesn't mean fiat means by government order. That means that they can put a value on anything. They can put a value on a 1 ounce gold coin of $1 million or 100,000. They can make it whatever they want to make, and then they don't have to produce those gold coins.
No, because then prices will just skyrocket. They can't. Gold is worth what it's worth, and you can't just say money is worth so much gold, because the prices are just going to adjust. The fact of the matter is, fiat is let it be made. Just make it out of thin air. You can't do that with gold. If you want gold, you have to mine it. You have to find it. You have to get it out of the ground. You got to fabricate it into a coin. That's the big difference between real money and fiat money. But, hey, thanks for the call. Don't go away. We got a lot more coming up on the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Now you know my colors, they feel like lead.
Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and while I've been doing my show, President Obama's been putting on a show over at the United Nations. He just, I think, finished giving his speech. I wasn't able to actually hear any of it. I saw him standing up there, so I'm not really sure what he said. I'll probably check it out later on today, but if anybody saw that and wants to comment, it might be an interesting topic to discuss. But anyway, let me go back to the phones. Next up is from New York. Chris, you're on.
Hey, Peter, I have a couple of questions. The first one is, what do you see the short-term outlook for all the millions of unemployed currently who basically have, service sector skills that you say, won't be very useful in this new economy, I guess?
Well, the outlook is pretty bleak, I think, on the employment front. I think jobs are going to be increasingly hard to find because employers are simply not going to be willing to create them. They're not going to be able to do it because in order to create a job, you have to be able to hire somebody and make a profit on them, which means that they have to generate more revenue than the cost of employing them. And, of course, the cost of employing them is not limited to the wages, but all of the other benefits and all the other legal compliance costs that you incur as a result of hiring. And I just think that based on the way the U.S. economy is structured right now, that it's just very, very difficult to employ people given the current wage scales and regulatory environment. And I think as long as the government continues to keep interest rates at near zero, as long as they keep trying to inflate this bubble economy of consumption and debt, that we're going to continue to sink deeper into this abyss, and more jobs are going to be lost.
Do you see some of these emerging economies maybe using the U.S. To outsource some of these service sector jobs at maybe a lower rate than what they were, getting over the U.S.?
Well, I don't see a lot of outsourcing to the U.S. until our currency drops and until, our wage costs come down a lot. But, yeah, at some point, it might be that foreigners will take advantage of the low cost of U.S. workers if, in fact, the dollar falls low enough and we don't impede the process with more rules and regulations. But, it is possible that even as our wages are forced lower based on a devalued currency, it still might be too expensive to hire Americans based on other factors that employers will encounter based on U.S. labor law and other taxes.
All right, and then assuming that they stay here, what do you think the new career path for our best and brightest will be in the new economy in the U.S.?
Well, I think there's still going to be a lot of bright people going into high-tech areas. I think there's opportunity here and abroad, and I think bright people will still go into medicine. Maybe they'll practice medicine in other countries. We'll see. Bright people will, I think, for a while continue to go towards Wall Street, which is probably unfortunate. We need their minds in other places. But, people that do acquire skills that are in demand all around the world will have the ability to market their skills to the highest bidder, and I think increasingly the highest bidders are going to end up being in other countries that are bidding with appreciated currency. But I think a lot of people are still going to be funneled through the educational system into a liberal arts type education where they really graduate without any true marketable job skills, and they have lots of debt, which ultimately may be forgiven or inflated away. But I think a lot of our young people are wasting some of their formative years just pursuing educations that are not really going to help them earn a living. And in fact, there are a lot of people who really shouldn't even be in college, or some of them shouldn't even finish high school. Not everybody has the aptitude. I mean, we have the idea now, the attitude that everybody has to go to college. Why? I mean, why should somebody with an IQ of 80 go to college and take remedial math, and what good is it? But that person might be very creative. He might be able to learn a trade. He might be able to be very successful. He might be able to earn more money than the guy with 140 IQ with a college degree. But forcing somebody to go to college just because you have some crazy idea that everybody should go to college doesn't help that person. Meanwhile, they're in college. They don't really learn anything. It's not, it's not for them. And a lot of times, parents can help steer their kids, but of course, they all have to go to college. I think if not as many Americans went to college, then the parents would be able to afford to send the kids that really have the aptitude for it, the kid that really might benefit from college, save the money for that kid, and the kid that probably would benefit from learning a trade or something else, you don't have to put him in college. But today the family feels that every kid, regardless of circumstances, needs to get a college degree. And these things cost a fortune thanks to government. But now that everybody has them, what good are they? I mean, if everybody's got a college degree, how do you differentiate yourself? Now you need a master's degree. How much does that cost?
All right. Last question. I don't own any physical gold in my possession, so I'm trying to preserve my wealth through, I guess, paper assets. And I'm more inclined to preserve my wealth through owning oil companies rather than through gold mining companies because of the income that they produce, and also because of the favorable, but in some cases, the favorable tax treatment. And you always talk gold among other things.
Well, you'll get the same tax treatment on gold stocks that you will on oil stocks. And I agree that right now the dividend yields on oil stocks are higher than the typical gold stocks. You get pretty good dividend yields on the oil stocks, and I own quite a few oil stocks myself. But it is my opinion that as the price of gold continues to rise, that the gold companies that are mining it are going to be increasing their dividends. And over the next maybe 10 or 20 years, you might be able to achieve, and I think you will, get more dividend income from your gold stocks than from your oil stocks. So I don't think that from a dividend perspective you should ignore these stocks, because I think they do have the potential to substantially increase their dividend payouts over time. And so I definitely would include them, and especially if you look at how they've performed over the last decade, they've done very well. Over the last few years, not as well. But I think I've done, in general, I'd say that I've done better on my mining stocks than I have on my oil stocks. I mean, there are some oil stocks that I own that have done better than some mining stocks that I own. And, there's some that are down, but I think in general, I think if somebody just bought, if you bought a broad basket of gold stocks and you bought a broad basket of oil stocks, the person who bought the gold stocks over the last 10 years or so has done a lot better. But, of course, it doesn't guarantee it's going to continue to be that way. But I wouldn't ignore the sector. I think you should include it if you can tolerate the risk. And, obviously, if you can tolerate the risk of oil stocks, you can probably tolerate the risk of having some gold stocks. And physical gold, that doesn't have any dividends, but I do think people should have some money in physical gold. Not all your money, and not even the majority of your money. But you should have some. Anyway, hey, thanks for your call. We've got Gary Johnson coming up after the break, so stick around, and then after the governor is done, we will be taking more calls. I know we still have some people in the queue, so if you're patient, we will get to you. Anyway, you're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
In the midst of fighting militiamen in one round, took down 6 of them. He ain't really a killer though, taking a lot of risks. This is what a poor person do.
The Peter Schiff Show.
He turned around and got a face full of hollow tips.
And they make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
Call in now. 855-4-SHIP.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. This is Peter Schiff. The second hour of the Peter Schiff Show is underway now. And joining me, presidential candidate, former Governor Gary Johnson. Gary, welcome to the show.
Peter, great to be on with you.
Yeah, I know we've had you on a couple of times in the past. You know, we got some good news. Was it yesterday that you got the Fox News guys to let you in on the debate?
Well, I'm in on the debate tomorrow night. So, you know what? I think I'm going to be saying some things that aren't being said, and that would have to do with a promise that I'm making as President of the United States to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013, and a promise also to veto any expenses that exceed revenue as President of the United States.
Yeah, before we get into the issues, how did you end up getting this invitation? I mean, did you have to browbeat them, or did they just call you up out of the blue and offer you the opportunity?
Well, it actually was that the criteria was 1% in the last 5 national polls, and I met that criteria. Now, ready for this? Get ready for this. The Republican Party of Florida is saying I shouldn't be in the debate because in the last 5 national polls, I didn't average 1%, but, Peter, I was excluded from even being in 2 of the last 5 national polls. Fox chose to interpret that as the last 5 national polls where my name was in the poll. I'd like to think that the Fox criteria was the fair criteria.
Right. So, in other words, the Republican Party objects because there were some polls where your name wasn't mentioned, and therefore you didn't have the opportunity to get 1% because you weren't one of the choices.
Right. And and for those listening, please listen to what I'm about to say and lend your own judgment to this. 3 weeks ago, CNN did a national poll. I was at 2% in that national poll, which put me ahead of 2 of the candidates that are on stage for the last 4 debates, and tied me with one of the candidates that's on stage in the last 4 national debates. A week ago, CNN came up with their updated poll, which they do every 2 weeks, national poll. Peter, I was not on the poll.
So they just dropped your name from the poll?
Dropped my name from the poll, right.
But they kept on the poll. They kept on the poll the names of people who polled lower than you the last time they did it.
Yes, exactly. Give me an explanation for that. Well,
I have an explanation. They're trying to undermine your candidacy because they don't like what you have to say.
Well, that is exactly the case. So, and of course, that was one of the polls that the Republican Party of Florida cited as, look, I wasn't at 1% that poll, so I wasn't on the poll.
Yeah. Well, look, the whole thing is ridiculous. But, I want to talk a little turkey with you because, there are 3 other governors or, former governors that are going to be debating with you on the stage. What is it, tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night, yes.
So there's a total of 4 governors. Without a doubt, your record as governor, right? Everybody wants to talk about who did a better job. But nobody, as a governor, can compare to you. the record of achievement under your administration, what happened in your state, what happened in government spending, there is no governor that can even hold a candle to you.
Well, I absolutely believe that, and that is the record that speaks for itself.
Yeah, you want to share some of the high points of your gubernatorial record with my audience?
Well, they came out with a report about a month ago on jobs being created in states of all the presidential candidates. So, bottom line, which presidential candidate has the best record on jobs? That was me, including Rick Perry. Now, I was asked for my response to that study. And my response was the same as it was when I was governor of New Mexico. Look, I didn't create a single job in the state of New Mexico. Private sector creates jobs, government doesn't. And in fact, back to my record, in New Mexico, there were 1,200 fewer state employees over an 8-year period while I was governor. That had never happened in the history of the state, where there was fewer state employees from one year to the next. That had never happened.
Can any of the other governors claim that they shrunk the size of their state government by reducing the head count of government employees?
I don't believe that anyone is laying claim to that one, because it probably didn't happen. But what I did do as governor is I ended up vetoing 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico, which arguably was more vetoes than the other 49 governors in the country combined. If I take the total vetoes of the other 3 governors that are on stage tomorrow night, I may have vetoed more bills than the 3 of them combined times 10. I'm just guessing.
Mm-hmm. So you have a real demonstrated track record of protecting your taxpayers from the growth of government. But I think one of the better statistics is how popular you were after you left office. You served 2 terms. And I think when you left office, you were more popular than any of the other governors in the race in the state that you govern.
Well, that was another poll that came out here about 6 weeks ago on the popularity of every single person running for president in their own state. So what's the favorability of all the candidates in their own state? There's only one candidate running for president that's viewed favorably in his or her own state, and that was me. And I think that's significant because New Mexico is 2-to-1 Democrat, and given my fiscal conservancy, you know what? I just think it speaks volumes to the fact that regardless of political party, people really do care about good stewardship of tax dollars. And I think I delivered on that in spades. But that's the case I'm out here making on the campaign trail, and gratefully I get to make that case tomorrow night on stage.
And you think that would be an incredibly strong case in this area, in this climate where everybody is blaming both parties, to have a candidate that can appeal to both the Democrats and the Republicans with a small government message. You know, that's a very rare combination. You'd think that the Republican Party should be embracing you. Instead, they're pretending you don't exist.
Well, and perhaps that's one of the issues. I'll go back to the 750 vetoes. I was an equal opportunity vetoer. A third of the legislature in New Mexico was Republican. A third of the bills I vetoed were Republican bills because, you know what, Republicans, whether you like to hear it or not, whether anybody wants to hear it or not, they grow government just like Democrats, only they do it in a good way. Ultimately, let's grow government for a short period of time to inevitably shrink government. Well, you know what? I never bought into that equation at all. And Republicans have a tendency to legislate what should or shouldn't happen in the bedroom.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why they don't want you around. They don't want you reminding people of the problems in the Republican Party. But, you know, we've got to admit we have these problems and address them so we can appeal to voters of both parties and independents. Anyway, stick around. We will be right back and continue this discussion on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Papa was a player who just what to say to get the women back to his layer and layer. His sex had a trophy.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry.
We're sorry.
Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff speaking with presidential candidate and debate participant for a change, Gary Johnson. And Gary, hopefully this means that you will be in all of the future debates as long as your candidacy continues. But, you know, one of the interesting things I think about your candidacy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are the only pro-choice candidate in the race on the abortion issue, correct?
I think I'm the only social non-conservative that will be on the stage tomorrow night. I am not a social conservative, and I respect anyone who has that position. But fundamentally, back to what you just said. Fundamentally, I believe in a woman's right to make choices that only a woman should be making.
Right, and that goes to a broad range of things, including whether or not they want to use marijuana, or whether or not they want to take a particular drug, or whether or not they want to accept a particular job, at a particular rate. I mean, you're consistent in your views that government should stay out, and I respect that, and I share that view. But the interesting thing is, you would imagine that for the sake of diversity, you've got one pro-choice on the abortion issue, which is a big polarizing issue in the Republican Party. And not every Republican is pro-life, and there are plenty of pro-choice Republicans. I do believe that when there are some Republicans that are real single-issue voters, when it comes to this issue, they can agree with you on everything you say, but if you're not pro-life, then they're not going to vote for you. But there are plenty of Republicans who are pro-choice. You would think the media would say, hey, there's one pro-choice guy in the race, let's make sure to have him in on the debates. Yet you're not there.
Well, statistically speaking, I think the majority of Republicans are actually pro-choice, but that's not their issue. And I put myself in that category. I did not get the social conservative vote running for governor of New Mexico in the primary the first time that I ran. But when I won the primary, I ended up getting all of the social conservative vote in the general election, because for those individuals who had that agenda as their main focus, well, then their focus changed to their second biggest item, which happened to be checkbook items, which happened to be dollars and cents, and I think I win that one hands down. So I think it's a similar situation here.
The big thing, if we have a pro-choice Republican candidate, we take a major wedge issue away from the Democrats, because they try to make it out like, well, if we elect a Republican, we'll be back to back alley abortions, and it'll be illegal to have an abortion. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what your position. I know when I ran for Senate, my position was, look, I'm pro-choice personally, but I think it should be left to the states. So I tried to appeal to the pro-life voter by saying, look, I don't think it's the federal government's business. I think if a state wants to limit abortion, the state has the right to do that. If I happen to be the governor of that state, I wouldn't do it, but I don't think the federal government should get involved in what is a state's right issue. And if that's your position, that is a position that actually can appeal to the social conservatives.
Well, that is my position. And as governor of New Mexico, I did sign a bill banning late-term abortion, believing that there is a point of viability. So I think that those choices should be made long before that point gets reached, and that those decisions best be left with the women involved.
Right, and as a state governor, you use your authority in that your state to decide that, hey, a late-term abortion is not a right that a woman should have, that they need to make that decision earlier on, and once the child develops to a certain point. So you did protect life at that point, and you still protected a woman's life to make a right to make choices early on, but you did it as a governor. You didn't do it as a president, because as a president, you wouldn't have that kind of constitutional authority.
Well, one thing I don't think that people in this country understand is that the law of the land is that a woman has the right to choose up to the point of viability of the fetus. And the Supreme Court defines viability of the fetus as being able to sustain the life of the fetus outside of the womb, even if by artificial means. I don't think people really understand that currently is the law of the land.
Yes, and I know that there is an element on the right that wants to define life from the moment of conception. Although you can argue, if you're going to define life at conception, why can't you define it 10 minutes before conception or an hour? And some people do, and that's why they say you can't even use birth control. That somehow that is wrong because you're preventing a life that might otherwise have come into existence from cut. So you could take it to an extreme. But to me, that definition, viability, seems to be a better one, clearly, because there are people that want to say that morning after pill, that you can't even take that even if you terminate a pregnancy a week after it, that it's the equivalent of murder. I mean, I think the majority of pregnancies, they terminate on their own. I mean, there's so many natural abortions when the body senses that there's something wrong with the embryo, that the body aborts it naturally.
Something that you touched on earlier that I think is a fact. I think the world vilifies Republicans because Republicans want to make choices for people that only the people involved should be making. I am a classical liberal. A classical liberal believes, if you Wikipedia classical liberal believes in less government. A classical liberal believes that the best thing that government can do for you and I is to empower you and I to make decisions that only you and I should be making.
Yeah, well, absolutely, absolutely. And, my dream ticket for the Republicans in 2012 would be Gary Johnson and Ron Paul. And I don't really care who's on the top and who's on the bottom, because I'd love to see you guys as our nominees. I think it would be a hell of an election, and we might actually win.
Well, apparently I'm not going to be that selection for Ron Paul because he has made a pledge that he, and if I'm wrong, please somebody blog me or correct me, but I think he bought into the pledge that he would only run with a vice president that supported pro-life positions.
Well, I think your position, I don't know, maybe he said that, I don't speak for Ron Paul, but I think if you have a position that, and I think Ron Paul's position is actually the same. I think Ron Paul believes he is pro life, but he believes it's a states' rights issue. He believes that the laws should be left to the states, not the federal government. And I think that's my position, and I think that's your position. So I don't really see any inconsistencies in your positions from the presidential election. Now, if you were running for the governor of a state, then it might be different, because he might be more inclined to say no abortions at all, and you would be inclined to allow abortions with restrictions. But from the president's perspective, the president should have no say in how the states treat this issue. And I think that that's Ron Paul's position, and I think that's your position. So I don't see any inconsistencies there.
Well, I want to be truthful here in the way I understand, in the way I'm understanding everything. Peter, I've got another interview here. I'm in New Hampshire, trying to make it happen here in New Hampshire. A terrific state politically.
Hey, well, Gary, we're running out of time. Good luck in New Hampshire. Good luck in the debates tomorrow night. And I hope you're in them, for the rest of these debates, because you're an important voice and you should not be excluded. Anyway, that's it, everybody. We will be back with another half hour of the Peter Schiff Show, so don't go away.
Schiff Show.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Anyway, we're going to go back to the phones. We've got some people that have been waiting on hold since before Governor Johnson called in. Next up is Paul calling from Houston, Texas. Paul, you're on the line.
Peter, yeah, it's actually Carl. I really enjoyed your testimony before Congress. I think you made some awesome some points as always. But I did have a quick question. It was kind of funny. I noticed that there was another panelist there that I think her name was Dr. Boucher.
Yeah, well, she was the woman sitting directly next to me, and she was the lone liberal. She was the only witness for the Democrats, so she was the Keynesian pro-Obama witness. The other ones were all kind of in my camp. I mean, not exactly, but they were all of the opinion that we needed less government and fewer regulations, and that the Obama stimulus jobs plan would not work.
Right, exactly. And I just thought there was this one point that I missed when I first saw it, and I watched another piece of it again, and I saw where you had written a note, a handwritten note, kind of quickly, and then you shifted it over to right in front of her, and then she turned it over, and then you turned it back over, and I was just curious what it was that you wrote on that paper.
Yeah, I mentioned this before on the show, so you might not have heard it. And I know there's been a lot of people are wondering, what was I scribbling on that note, But basically what I was trying to point out, and I actually made the point when she obviously wasn't reading the note, I went and said it. So when I told her what my tax rate was, when I said, look, I'm paying, 35% federal, 3% Medicare, that's 38, throw on the state, I'm up in the 40s, and, that's where I am right now. And I said it to her. Then she basically said to me privately, she said, well, that's just your marginal rate. That's just the amount of tax you pay on your marginal money. And what I put on that note, I said to her, I said, my marginal rate is my rate. Almost all the money I earn is taxed at the marginal rate. It's because I have a high income. That's my point. Because I have a high income, the government takes almost half of it. And in fact, if you throw in all the taxes I pay, and if I were to actually spend all the money I earned after I finished paying all those taxes, I would be giving more than half of my income to the government. But even if you just take Medicare, and I'm not even counting FICA, because FICA is only on the first like $110,000 or $115,000, so that's only a small part of my income. So I don't even consider that to be part of the tax burden, even though sure, I mean I pay it, but if you take Medicare, which is 3% of my income, because I pay both sides, I mean, I'm self-employed, 3% Medicare, 35% federal, that's 38, and if you throw on almost 7% for the state of Connecticut, you add that stuff up, I mean, that's huge. That's a huge chunk of my income right there before I even spend a dime. And, of course, the minute I start to spend any of my income, I'm paying more taxes, because if I buy something, I'm going to pay a sales tax. And, of course, there are other hidden taxes. I mean, if I buy gasoline, there are a lot of taxes that are built into the price even before I pay the sales tax.
Sure. And one other question, Peter. I was curious. I've heard you speak about this before, but I was just wondering if you plan on opening additional branches, and especially in the Houston or Dallas area.
Yeah, I do now. It's kind of ironic because, I've been under, I haven't been able to, for regulatory purposes, I have not been able to open offices or hire new brokers. And, of course, I finally brought this to the attention of Congress because I thought, hey, here's a hearing on jobs. Hey, I'm a situation where regulations, not only, in theory, yes, regulations make it more difficult to hire people, and a lot of people, because of regulations, choose not to hire people or hire fewer people. But here I am specifically being told by the regulators that I can't hire people. So, and actually having been fined because I hired people when they told me not to hire people. So I thought that's particularly germane to the discussion about regulation. So I thought that story would be interesting. So I brought it up. I really didn't get much questions from the congressman on there. Nobody really questioned me. What do you mean you can't hire people? But it seemed to resonate a lot because in the news, because I was on Fox News 3 times. Or twice yesterday and once this morning. They played it on the Fox 5. I was on Greta Van Susteren, and then I was on Fox and Friends, all because of this idea that, hey, here's a businessman getting fined for hiring people. But I don't know if it's coincidence or if they have anything to do with one another. But a week after that testimony, I finally got the written permission to hire more people. So the answer to your question is yes. I mean, we are going to be hiring more people, and I am going to start opening new branches, and I think the first 2 cities that I want to move into are Chicago and Dallas. So I am trying to move. I have no offices in the Midwest. We have a lot of people in our database. We have a lot of clients in Texas. We have a lot in Illinois. And so I think those 2 cities make a lot of sense for my first expansion. I also want to concentrate on building up my office in South Florida. We have really neglected to build that up. And, in fact, I want to expand all of my existing offices. So I'm going to be moving forward with that over time now that I have the green light. But, I would have been doing this 2 years ago had it been up to me. But, unfortunately, it wasn't up to me. It was up to somebody else.
Yeah, great. All right. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for the call. Next up it's Sarando. I guess if I'm pronouncing that right. Calling from Peru, Lima, Peru. Sonato, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's Fernando.
Oh, Fernando. All right.
I was just calling up to make a comment about that last caller who called about the gold. And it's funny how confused people are. It's not only him. Like, there are actually, I've seen smart intellectuals make the same mistake. They always look at gold in terms of fiat currencies. They don't look at it in terms of weight and in terms of what it can buy in weight along history. And, like, the analogy you always make about a dime, finding that silver dime, that guy has no clue what you mean. If he was, to elaborate on exactly what, a little bit more on how, the weight in terms of purchasing power, like, your
I mean, well, the things on gold, gold, if you go back to barter, before we had money, we had barter, right? And so if I had a chicken and I wanted a pig, I had to find somebody with a pig who wanted a chicken. And so when you barter, you give somebody something of value, some commodity, something tangible, and they give you something else. What happened with gold and how gold became money is gold is also a commodity. Gold does have an intrinsic value. There is a use for gold. People can use it for something, just like you can eat a chicken. You can use gold. You can wear it. You can use it. You can make things out of it. So it has a function. It has a utility unique to itself. It has properties that people value. And so what happened was when we went from a barter economy to an economy based on money. Money is the one commodity that everybody will accept in exchange for every other commodity. And the reason that gold is so uniquely suited is, look, you can't use chickens as money because no two chickens are alike. Meanwhile, a chicken is going to, how long does a chicken live? You can't, how can you carry chickens around in your pocket? And, they're not uniform. Why gold can be money is because an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. If you got an ounce of gold, it's the same as everybody else's ounce of gold. They're uniform. And you can take an ounce of gold and turn it into 2 half-ounce coins or 1 tenth-ounce coins. You can break it down into parts, and everybody knows what it is. And if I borrow an ounce of gold from you and I pay you back, you're getting exactly what you loaned me. If you loan me a chicken, maybe the chicken I'd pay you back. Does it weigh exactly as much? Does it have the same number? Does it lay the same kind of eggs? So gold was the commodity that won out above all other commodities as being the most suitable to serve as money. But what happened when we went to a fiat system, we said, hey, let's just base prices not on a commodity that everybody agrees to accept. Let's just try to have a piece of paper. Because, hey, why are we wasting all these resources mining gold when no one is really using it? Everybody's just exchanging it. Why don't we save all the energy that's used to mine gold and let's use it more productively, and we'll just use paper as money? Well, in theory that could work. But the problem is, in practice, it can never work because then you have to trust the politicians not to print too much paper. And you can never trust them. That is the problem. And so since you can't trust a politician not to print too much money, not to try to get elected by buying votes, since you can't trust politicians, you have to trust gold. And the price that we pay for the mining industry is small, right? That the resources that we have to use to look for and produce gold, that amount of money is small compared to all that we lose by government money printing and the whole fiat system.
Yes, that's true. And if you look at the charts too, I've looked at charts, of gold's purchasing power and weight versus other commodities and other products, and it really is amazing how. It does fluctuate. The different commodities and different prices for different products have fluctuated against gold a little, and some a lot. But if you look at everything in terms of each other, like all products, gold is so strong and consistent. Like that old saying a long time ago, like 100 years ago, they say you could buy a good man's suit with a gold coin, with 1 ounce of coin. And today, that's how much exactly a good man's suit costs. Just like your oil, you know.
Yeah, gold is about $800. Yeah, you can $1,800 is how much you would pay. You can get them on sale, but if you want to buy a fine men's suit, you know, $1,800, you know, is what they cost. Now, if you want to have it tailor-made, not off the rack, I mean, sometimes you could buy suits for $4,000 or $5,000. But if you want to buy, I mean, the good suits that I wear, my good suits, they generally retail for about that much. Sometimes I get them on sale, like I buy them for $1,200 or $1,400. But sometimes, you know, you pay $1,800. But that's what they cost, and that's what, you know. And 1 ounce of gold 100 years ago would buy the equivalent, a high-quality suit. Can you buy a men's suit for less than $1,800? Of course, you could buy them for less. You can buy a cheap one for $300. But then again, there were plenty of cheap suits 100 years ago that didn't cost an entire ounce of gold. But good suits, really good suits, that's what they cost, and that's what they cost today. Anyway, hey, thanks for the call. Stick around. We will be back with another segment of the Peter Schiff Show, so don't go away.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff, and we are at the end of another 2 hours. The time is flying by once again. Hey, before I take any more calls, I got a little sound. You know, for those of you, I've been talking and warning about, hey, we're going to have civil unrest, we're going to have riots, just you wait. And, you know, Mayor Bloomberg in New York finally, you know, he's warning now. He thinks that if things don't turn around, we're going to see riots. Well, listen to some of the words. This is some sound from Stephen Lerner, an organizer, and he's talking to a group. They're at the Progressive Summit for a Fair Economy. Now, a fair economy, from the point of view of a progressive, means the government steals money from some people and gives it to other people. That's their definition of fair, right? Favoring one group or one person over another. It's an Orwellian way to view the word fair. But anyway, Progressive Summit for a Fair Economy. And listen to the words. Listen to what he's inciting among this group of students and union members. Here, we'll start with cut number 1.
We're not going to convince the other side that we're right through intellectual argument. We need to create power, and in a way, we need to talk about how we create a crisis for the super rich. If you look up at the Arab Spring, what do all the things that are changing the world have in common? When the people are in the streets, are they always getting permits and getting permission and saying, do you think that, like in Egypt, they said to the police, oh, could we have a permit to stay in this square? And if they had said no, they all would have gone home. And so I think that's the moment that we're on. And the reason I talked about what's in us is most of us don't think about violating the rules. I remember the first time I was arrested. It was terrifying.
So one thing he's right about, that you're not going to convince people with an intellectual argument, because they have no intellectual arguments. Their arguments are baseless. They're not based on intellect at all. They're based on the antithesis of intellect. But also, you notice how he says that he wants to create a crisis for the rich. What does he mean by a crisis? I mean, he wants to scare them, right? Maybe the crisis would be that people are stealing their wealth. Maybe they're feeling their lives are in jeopardy. Is that the kind of crisis that he wants to create for the rich? And, of course, do you really want to create a crisis for the people that provide all the jobs, that produce the goods, the services that we all consume and many take for granted? Do we really want to create a crisis for those people? Anyway, here he continues. Here's cut number 2.
But I think if we really believe that we have to create a crisis for the other side, then we have to be serious. Who here feels we're in a crisis? Workers are in a crisis. Do you think anybody running a big corporation would raise their hand? So there's a crisis for us, right? Is there a crisis for them? So let's think about that. There's a crisis for us, and there's not for them. So what do we need to do? What would change their behavior? We have to create a crisis for them. Look, I'm not a professor. I'm not an economist. I'm your friendly neighborhood union organizer.
Okay, so he's just your friendly neighborhood union organizer, right? Like your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, right? Hey, nothing to fear here. He's just a friendly guy who wants to create a crisis for the rich. So in other words, the rich are not in crisis, and that's a problem. And so if we can just spread the crisis, instead of trying to figure out, hey, how can we improve the lot of the non-rich? How can we drag the rich down? How can we make sure that they're suffering? And of course, when he says the rich aren't suffering, I mean, what does he mean? I mean, there are plenty of white-collar people who have lost their jobs. There are plenty of people who used to make a pretty good living, and maybe they would have been considered rich, who are unemployed today. It's not just the blue-collar workers who have lost jobs. There are plenty of upper-income people who have lost jobs. There are plenty of upper-income people who are working but who are making considerably less than they used to. There were plenty of upper-income people who used to get 7% on their CDs, retired people who are now getting nothing and who are having to burn through the principal that they thought they were going to have just to survive. So it's not true to state that, hey, the rich aren't feeling any pain. Now, yes, I mean, overall, yes, if you're rich, is it better than being poor? Of course. But what is it that he wants? I mean, how much heat does he want to turn up on the rich, and how is it going to improve the lot of the poor, the middle class, to try to destroy the rich or impoverish the rich? How is that going to help anybody? But anyway, let's continue. Here's cut number 3.
All of us know that we'll change their behavior. We'll force them to negotiate if we create a crisis for them. If we believe our rhetoric, if we believe things are so bad, what is it we're willing to do? And if it's not starting to create a crisis for those who are in power, I don't know how we get there.
All right, so what is it? I thought that maybe that we'd have some sound. I guess that's all we've got. If there was something in addition where he actually says what he meant. I mean, because creating a crisis, I believe that the crisis would involve violence, would involve crimes. I mean, I don't know what else he could be talking about unless he's just talking about higher taxes. But I don't think raising taxes on people is what he's thinking as far as crisis. I think that he wants the rich to be afraid, to be scared, to be fearful. And what would they be afraid of? What would they be fearful of? A mob, right? People attacking them, people doing violence against them. That's the crisis that I think he's talking about. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is happening. And, of course, the union that he represents, it's a Service Employees International Union, and he's an organizer for these service sector union people. But anyway, very, very disturbing to hear that kind of rhetoric. And I'm wondering what else was said. I don't know if we have any more sound for the future, but we'll have to hold that off for another show. Anyway, let me go to one last caller. Joe is on hold from Troy, Michigan. Joe, you're welcome to the show.
Hey, here. I just had a quick question as far as I don't know if you heard the story about Full Tilt Poker, about how they recently got busted for a Ponzi scheme that came out today. And no. I'm a libertarian, and I would consider myself a free market. I believe in free market capitalism. Well, apparently they owe the people that have accounts with them $390 million, and there's only $60 million left. And if you look at that, like, market or whatever you want to say, that's a completely unregulated market. And my question would be, I guess, how, from a libertarian perspective or free market perspective, can that be solved through the market rather than having it being regulated by, the government?
I mean, there are always going to be criminals, right? Regulation isn't going to stop the criminal. And honest people are going to be honest regardless of the regulations. And in fact, the regulations simply are going to run up the costs of the honest businessman and force them to have to charge more for their services. But look, free markets doesn't mean that you should be free to rip people off. I mean, no. I mean, fraud is illegal, and there should be civil remedies and, in certain cases, criminal penalties for people who defraud other people. But in a free market, some people are going to commit fraud. That's why you've got, the expression caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. Do your own due diligence. The problem is when we turn over the due diligence to the government, it's worse. More is lost. There's more fraud. And honest people suffer. So, no, I am not in favor of fraud, and I think we'll have less fraud if we have less regulation from the government and more due diligence and more regulation from the private sector. But, hey, it's a great question. I wish I had more time. Call again maybe tomorrow. We'll discuss it at greater length. In the meantime, this is Peter Schiff, SchiffRadio.com. Thanks for listening. Tune in again tomorrow. That's it for now.